Down syndrome, as you correctly mentioned in your introduction, is a trisomy 21. In other words, there's an extra chromosome at point 21 in the human cell. But the problem is that when that is expressed, it comes out that the child has a number of what we call dysmorphic features. In other words, there's a number of features associated with Down syndrome. And those include things like developmental delay, a certain type of look with slanted eyes and different features, as well as mental retardation, cardiac problems, etc. So it's a real challenge, and it's something that requires a very comprehensive approach in order to manage it properly.
There have been suggestions in some obviously informal quarters that when a woman takes, or rather waits to have a child and obviously has a child in her advanced years, that this is a possible cause. Is this assertion correct?
It's partially correct. Down syndrome can occur at any age of the mum, but there is an increased incidence of Down syndrome with increasing maternal age. So in other words, as a mum gets slightly older, after 35, closer to 40, over 40, the risk of getting a baby with Down syndrome increases. And there are ways of picking that up during pregnancy, but that opens up quite a new range of challenges. Because if, for example, a mum is 14 weeks pregnant and she has a test that tells her she has a Down's baby, and that's, she's pregnant with a Down's baby, the problem then comes in that what is she going to do about it? Is she going to terminate the pregnancy, or is she going to carry this pregnancy through? And then that comes through with its own ethical and moral challenges.
Now, you talked about the 21 chromosome, I think you mentioned.
Yes.
So is there any way of preventing this?
Not really. I mean, unfortunately, we know that obviously a higher maternal age, so maybe having a baby at a younger age would minimize that risk or reduce it. But unfortunately, even in young mums, there is a certain level of incidence of Down syndrome. So there is no way of preventing a mum from having a Down's baby, unfortunately.
Well, World Down Day is actually commemorated tomorrow, and one of the things that they encourage people to do is be as colourful as possible, wear lots and lots of socks. I've actually got my colourful pair of socks on this morning. What awareness are you seeking to create on this day?
I think the awareness is around reducing the stigma. I mean, the news story you carried just before this interview about the young person that was, killed, a Down's person.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stigma in society, and a lot of it comes due to ignorance. These individuals with Down syndrome are differently abled, and they have to be accepted into society with their own limitations. They need their own support structures, and families that have a child with Down syndrome need an immense amount of support in order to cope with it. And that ranges from caring for the child so that the parents can go and seek gainful employment, to actually looking after the baby, as well as the complications that the child may have. So there's a whole network of support structures that are needed. But I think from a societal perspective, it's reducing the stigma and understanding that, people with Down syndrome are simply differently abled, and they are born that way without any fault of their own. And they should be accepted as they are, as individuals with their own specific limitations.
One of the biggest challenges, certainly that I find, is that how do you engage with an individual with Downs? What can you or can you not do? And I think that potentially is where the stigma comes from, because you potentially do not want to appear to ill-treat or mistreat them.
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, children with Down syndrome tend to have developmental delay. So they may have limited verbal skills. They may have some degree of mental retardation. They often overweight. Overall, they tend to have a pleasant disposition. I think the approach to a child with Down syndrome should be not necessarily for society at large to necessarily engage and sort of with the individual, but rather to ensure that individuals such as these are protected and their particular needs are recognized. So I think it's more about preventing them from being exposed to unnecessary harm. I mean, an unattended child, for example, in a shopping center, I mean, at any time is risky, but a Down syndrome baby, I mean, will be completely overwhelmed. So we need to be very careful, and parents with Down syndrome, with a child with Down syndrome, need to understand that their child has specific needs and they need to be guided. So their support structure and their knowledge is key to taking this whole situation into a place where Down's children are accepted fully.
Does Down syndrome affect lifespan of these individuals that live with it?
There is a decreased lifespan due to the complications associated with Down syndrome. And the major complication is cardiac. So many children with Down syndrome have heart defects. And it's those heart defects that lead to cardiac failure and various other problems. And children with Down syndrome therefore have an increased mortality from that. They also have increased risk of various other problems. So unfortunately, there is some decreased lifespan. And there again, it's the early intervention with the correct medical approach that can minimize those complications.
Can you take us through this medical approach? What is administered?
So the medical approach is firstly relies on diagnosis. So any child that's born with Down syndrome needs a full cardiac assessment at birth, because those babies tend to have what we call ventricular septal defects. They have something called tetralogy of Fallot, which is a complex heart defect that can cause heart failure and can cause the baby to not come off oxygen and actually go into cardiac failure. So those things need to be picked up early. Then it's the developmental delay, it's feeding difficulties at birth. So these babies need to be often watched in ICU if they're so sick. And if not sick and they're actually discharged, then they need regular follow-up, especially in the first year of life. And then I would suggest that every year they need to have blood tests to look at thyroid function. They need to look at their white cell counts to make sure that they're not developing any complications in the blood. So they need expertise, and they need to be managed by specialists who are experienced in dealing with children with Down syndrome.
Well, let's talk about extracurricular activity. I remember years ago being part of or supporting an organization called the Special Olympics, and that supported children with Down syndrome playing sport. How important is this as a factor?
No, that is very important. Physical activity is an integral part of childhood. So it's very important that children do have engaged in physical activity. One of the features of Down syndrome is what we call low muscle tone. They have something called hypotonia. And what's actually works very well is horse riding. Because horse riding in children with Down syndrome, it helps them from a physical point of view. It helps them with their core stability. It also helps them with the tactile, touching the horse and experiencing that. So it's been found to be very beneficial in children with Down syndrome. And then in addition to that, encouraging them to do sports, but within their ability. So parents of children with Down syndrome should help them, but let them engage in something that they are comfortable with and not in anything that's going to put pressure on a child with Down syndrome. The last thing we want is to stress such a child out by forcing them to do activities that are beyond their ability.
Now, that statistic that we talked about earlier on is approximately 6,000 are born with Down syndrome. Is this in South Africa or is this globally?
No, that's in South Africa. That is in South Africa, yeah.
All right, Dr. Iqbal, thank you so much for your time this morning.